All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfrey, and I am your host, per usual. Um, if the quality of this week is a little bit lesser, I apologize. I'm kind of running on fumes here. It's been a long day. The Super Bowl was here in the United States, and got a family tradition around that, so a lot of stuff's been going on, and my insomnia has been acting up for the last several weeks. So I'm doing this because I don't want to try and squeeze it in Monday, but yeah. Again, if I sound a little bit out of sorts, that's the reason. So thank you for bearing with me on that much. I appreciate it. All right, on the agenda this evening, UFC 312. Boy, that was a thing that happened, wasn't it? We'll review that. That was not worth $80. Would you be honest about that? That was nothing about that was worth the money the UFC was charging. I get reimbursed for pay-per-view purchases, and I'm very grateful for that. But realistically, that was a very, very poor pay-per-view. Just not necessarily in the sense that all the fights were terrible, because that's a bridge too far. There were some okay fights, but for what the UFC's charging, uh-uh, not even close. We will preview UFC on ESPN Plus 109. We're back in the warehouse, and fights kind of look like that. The main event's good. And should be said, main event's good, but we'll get to the preview there. Then we have um, actually quite a few bits of news to get to. The judge approved the settlement in the fighter lawsuit, among other things, so I'm going to try not to take forever, but you already know how long this is, and I'm still guessing because I'm still recording, so. Anything you can do to help the product, like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review, y'all know the drill on that. Thank you very much. Okay. UFC 312. How did the predictions go? Not too bad. 8-3-1. Um, I changed my mind on Suarez and Zhang the first time I saw them square up. It was was it the press conference? I think that was it. Suarez struggled a bit fighting up at flyweight because she didn't have these uh, big size and strength advantages. She still got that win. It was over Montana De La Rosa. But she struggled a bit in that fight, and she relies a lot on some physical edges. And seeing those two next to each other, those are just not there. And that was enough for me to swap that one. So again, 8-3-1. Let's see. There was a draw in the Bellato and Crute fight. Betting the majority draw like always pays out plus 6,600. You know, Crute's had two draws at this point. I mean, I think the other one was split though, not majority. So, okay. What did I get wrong that I think I maybe should have been able to figure out? I should have trusted the odds a little bit more with Santos and Jenkins. Santos doesn't have a very impressive record if you look at it, but I think this brought him to like 2-2. But if you remember the fights in particular, he fights very, very well. So I maybe should have got that one right. Um, we lost the fight between oh, there was a weight cut issue for Tumen Denberdel, so him and Hyun Sung Park did not happen. So again, that one didn't go through. Let's see. Got Cody Steele and Rong Zhu incorrect, but so did everybody. Um, got Mikolev and Jusei wrong. I'm not mad about that one. Mikolev, that fight represented a big step up in what he's demonstrated he's capable of in ways that I don't think were reasonably foreseeable. So I'm not mad about that one. Rongju, I still think I would have picked Cody Steele. You heard me hemming and hawing about that one a little bit last week, I think, but I should have given him more credit than I did at a bare minimum. But everything else went pretty good. I feel especially proud of any of those. Tom Nolan was an underdog to Vyacheslav Barsho, and not a huge underdog, but enough of an underdog that made me kind of go, like, why? Like, I like Slava Claus, but I don't know. He's one of those guys that will turn in some pretty good fights. He'll win some fights, but just there's nothing about this fight felt like, this is a real, you know, I feel comfortable picking him. I don't feel comfortable picking him very often. Um, yeah, I think that's it. A lot of the rest of those were. We had a pretty even split actually between favorites and underdogs. 6 wins for favorites, 5 wins for underdogs, and of course the one draw. Um, yeah, so that's where we are. So again, 8-3-1 brings us to 34-15-1 on the year. I'm doing okay. Like to get that a little further ahead. I'm kind of happy this one went as well as it did. This I said I think when I was previewing this. This is the kind of event that can go sideways on you in a hurry. So I will take it, and we will get to the individual fights. So main event for the UFC middleweight title. Dricus du Plessis defeats Sean Strickland via unanimous decision, 50-45 twice and 49-46. I was 50-45. The fourth round was 3 or 4 that you could have maybe given Strickland. Let me have a quick look at what good old Ben Cartilage did on that one. He gave Strickland the second. I'm not going to get up in arms over that. There were a couple of, again, slightly close rounds. But nothing that would, get you to a Strickland scorecard. This was very clearly a du Plessis fight. No, fourth was when he broke his nose. So he couldn't have given. Strickland actually did okay work numerically in the fourth, but he was on the wrong end of the more relevant blows, including the one that busted his nose. So if you gave the second to Strickland, I don't want to dig into the rounds in particular right now, so I'm just going to say I don't think it's horrible, even if I don't personally agree all that much. Let's see. So, some interesting stuff actually came out of this fight, though, if you're kind of a nerd about this stuff. How did du Plessis pull this off? Is the question I'm going to pose here. I actually have some, answers for that. This is the most decisive loss that Sean Strickland has suffered, I think, since the Pereira fight. Now, granted, that was a stoppage. But yeah, since then, he's lost 2 split decisions. One to Jared Cannonier. I kind of thought he won that fight. And then the first du Plessis fight, which in real time I scored for DDP. Rematch, I'm more sympathetic to a Strickland scorecard. I think even on rewatch, I still kind of favored DDP. I think the only round I flat out got wrong was the 5th. But if you do go 3-2 for Strickland in that fight, 0 issues, perfectly fine scorecard. So yeah, this was the most definitive loss since the Pereira fight in 2022. his most definitive loss again absent the Pereira fight at middleweight. Um, yeah. So a few things that Duplessis did really well here. Um, his team is good. This needs to be said. Let me preface what I'm about to say with DDP is a very thoughtful fighter. If you listen to him talk about fighting, he was on Demetrius Johnson's. DJ did an interview with him recently. If you actually listen to some of the stuff when he gets talking about fighting, he's really thoughtful about it. Like he might not have the most refined technique in the world for every situation, but he's not some idiot out here just swinging haymakers. You don't achieve what he's achieved with that mentality. His team is also very, very smart. Very, very well. He was very well prepared for this fight. Um, he was adept at stopping Sean Strickland's jab from getting going. And again, a few different ways he did this. I'll go into detail, but he was very ready for that this time around. The jab of Strickland in their first fight actually did pretty decent work. Here, he landed on occasion. You're never going to avoid every jab somebody throws, but it was not nearly the uh, scoring mechanism, the weapon it was in their first fight. So he also pretty much completely removed Strickland's front kick game. And if you take away Sean Strickland's jab, he doesn't really have much else. I mean, I'm not saying he's a bad fighter, but he is the kind of fighter where one particular tool is kind of what everything else is built around. And if he doesn't have access to that one tool, it kind of messes with the rest of his game. Because he doesn't have much of a right-hand lead. Um, he doesn't throw a lot of... He'll throw, again, teeps and front kicks. The difference being a teep comes off the front leg. If you care about like some of the specifics of differentiation there. But he doesn't throw a lot of head kicks. Doesn't throw a lot of leg kicks. Doesn't do a lot of stance switching. Doesn't do a lot of level changing. So if you can sort of defuse the two major weapons that he builds off of, it really messes with his ability to be effective. So Duplessis did some really clever things here. First of all, the way to kind of mess with the front kick is he made him come forward. And he didn't back up in a straight line most of the time, but he did a lot of circling. And landing a front kick while moving forward, not impossible, but it requires a couple of things. One, that your opponent is moving in a straight line, more or less. Because the front kick is a straight line attack, so if they've got lateral or circular movement going on, it's very difficult to land. Two, you have to really be willing to commit your weight. You can't really teep moving forward. Look, you can in like strict Muay Thai, but they also like watch how those guys do it. It's really short steps. It's against someone who is willing to engage them on those terms, and it's in relatively close proximity. It's just hard to throw your front leg in a front kick while moving forward. The mechanics of that are very difficult, especially to do consistently, unless you bring your feet together a lot, which Strickland has a habit of doing, but actually did a little bit less of that here because he had to constantly be moving. And moving at angles. If he's able to kind of just go forward, bringing your feet together, it's still not a great idea, but it doesn't hinder you all that much. The way Duplessis was circling meant that when Strickland would bring his feet all the way together, Duplessis could easily take an offensive angle and then fire something at him. So he didn't do a whole lot of that. So now, like, the front kicks are, again, they're not gone, but they're pretty well neutralized. He did a lot of hand fighting, especially when he was southpaw, because DDP switches stance a lot. Anytime he was southpaw, he would kind of jab with Strickland, hand fight with him, disrupt that. When he was orthodox, a little bit of the same, just hand fighting with both hands. And because he was able to get Strickland kind of moving forward so consistently, that opened up his calf kicks. And he landed some pretty solid ones. Now, Strickland kind of just kept coming forward, but those are not pleasant. The other major thing that DDP had going for him, his left leg. I've said this a few different times, talking about him and his tools. His left leg is very dexterous. It's very quick. If he's orthodox, it comes up very quickly to the body or to the head. If he's southpaw, same kind of thing. He doesn't kick a lot with his right leg. If you'll notice, not saying never, but he primarily kicks with his left leg. And it is a fairly effective weapon. He was landing some pretty good body kicks. He had some glancing head kicks. Landed a couple of actually fairly good head kicks. And that was really kind of the foundation. You diffuse the jab with hand fighting, lateral movement, punish forward movement with leg kicks and body kicks. And his punching technique, sometimes it's really good. Sometimes it's a little bit wild. And it was a little bit wilder here, but by necessity. See, Sean Strickland, his punching defense for MMA is actually really good. I know. Pereira clobbered him. That's Alex Pereira. And while some of the tools that Pereira used are very effective against Strickland because of some of his defensive patterns, if just anybody could do that, other people would have. Again, I know that like there's some video of a older man, Ray Sefo, kind of doing the body jab, get you reaching, lunging left hook, which is basically what Pereira did. But Strickland has changed a couple of small things about some of his footwork and his alignment that makes that just a little bit more harder to pull off. It's still a weapon that you can use against him, a sequence rather, but he's a little bit better about, again, really small things that kind of stop that from being quite as immediately devastating a weapon. A lot of this is in like the specifics of his stance, some of his footwork, some of his reactions. He still parries with the backhand when you jab at him, especially when you jab low, and that's kind of what opens that up. But he's a little bit better about not just parrying now when that comes in. He kind of parries and either leans or moves. So there's another little layer of defense there instead of just parrying the body jab and then leaving yourself wide open for the left hook. But again, he is so great about disrupting punching lanes, about catching punches, about just obfuscating the trajectory of your blows. And du Plessis going, okay, I'm going to just throw myself at you on occasion. Just these weird jumping overhands. Almost threw a couple of like hammer fists. Just anything to get around the reactionary blocking of Strickland to land on him. Not how you would teach anyone to strike. But the whole purpose of fighting is to find tools that work for you and against your opponent. And a lot of very good strikers have tried to use traditional striking on Strickland and have struggled. Again, Pereira, sure, got the better of him. Izzy really struggled against him. Jared Cannonier really struggled against him in places. Uh, he's just really good about making your offense not actually work all that well. So Du Plessis had to find ways around some of his blocking patterns to land on him. And it worked. He was landing pretty well. He also, throwing the body kicks, the calf kicks, the general constant work. Then in the fourth round, Strickland lands a jab, and Du Plessis fires back with a right hook that just very well timed. Strickland's jab is normally pretty snappy. This one got out there, but didn't come back where it should have. And Strickland didn't really move his head or shoulder roll after the jab, and that right hand from Du Plessis broke his nose visibly. And credit to Strickland, he reached up, kind of reset it himself, and then kept fighting. But I need to give Strickland another bit of credit here. He's tough. Got his nose broken. He had a spinning back fist at one point. He had a spinning back elbow, and just never even looked like he was close to going down. So he's very, very durable in the cage. And so need to give him that credit, but his offensive potency was just was neutralized. Du Plessis, a little bit of a wild man in places, but he's not reckless. And he's not wild because he's out of ideas. A lot of it is finding tools that work against the opponent. And maybe they don't look the way you think they should, or maybe these are not things you give much credence to because it's not textbook. And there's a lot about how Du Plessis fights that I would never teach somebody. He is not how you teach someone to fight if you have to start them. Right? You don't teach something. He would not be your tape study if you want to learn, okay, here's how you do the crisp 1-2. Here's a lot of that stuff. There is stuff you might show tape on him for. But he is willing to find the right tools, even if they're unorthodox, for whoever he's fighting. You couple that with his power. He may not be the biggest one-punch guy, but he's clearly got power. Good kicking. Really good cardio. I mean, he doesn't look all that different in the fifth round than in the first. And he always looks a little bit like, maybe he's fatiguing, but some of that is just breathing patterns. I mean, you obviously slow down a little bit over the course of a 5-round fight, but he's not quite ever as fatigued as you think he is. And when you realize that, okay, after like the 3.5-minute mark of the first round, he's kind of the same guy from that point to the end of the fight. And being able to be that consistent with your output, that well conditioned, that kind of effective, throughout the course of a fight, that's a real weapon, especially for guys this size. He fights at a pretty good clip for a middleweight. Also, his physical strength, dude is an ox. And I think Israel Adesanya described him best when he called him stubborn. Watching his fights, he is just stubborn. I mean that as a compliment. Like, he just won't give in. Doesn't matter what adversity you throw at him. Mentally, like, nah, he's not gonna give up. Doesn't mean he can't be beaten, mind you, but he is never going to be deterred. You're never gonna get in his head in the cage, really. And that ability to just kind of will yourself forward is another weapon, man, that some very, very successful fighters don't quite have. You don't always need it, depending on how, great some of the other elements of your game are, but he's got it, and he uses it. So, that brings him to 2 successful title defenses, which ties him with Rich Franklin. In the aftermath of this, Du Plessis said, I think I'm a top 3 pound-for-pound guy in the sport. Now, if you just look at his technique, you might laugh at that. And I understand. Some of his technique is baffling. I mean, literally, I do not understand some of the thought processes there. And not all this is thought out. It's reactions. So when I just say, I don't understand how you can be as good as he is, and some of the time, watching his head goes down, overhand right that's a little bit windmilly. But here's the thing about that, guys. He hasn't lost at middleweight since his 5th professional fight in 2014. Think about that for a second. His only other loss is at welterweight to Roberto Soldic. And those two went 1-1. He stopped him in their first fight, got stopped in their second. Then, since then, so his last loss at all was in 2018. His last middleweight loss was 11 years ago, basically, at this point. In the UFC, he's only been the distance 3 times. Once against Brad Tavares, who's kind of hard to put away, then twice with Sean Strickland, who's hard to put away. Everybody else he's gotten out of there. He's fought some pretty decent guys, and then some, a handful of really good ones. If you look at his actual track record, when he says I'm, the 3rd best pound-for-pound guy in the sport, sort of depends on what you mean. A lot of people take pound for pound to mean skillful. But there's a component of it that is success. And you can't argue his success. And he's had enough of it at this point that you can't pretend it's accidental. You do not luck your way into being 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9-0 in the UFC, including winning the belt and defending it twice. I'm going to tell you how lucky you'd have to be to pull that off on just luck. So I think we should take seriously the notion that just because he doesn't do things according to the textbook doesn't mean he's not good. What he's doing is working. And you can be confused by that. I don't blame you. But you can't pretend that this is a fluke. You can't pretend that this is all down to his opposition being bad. He finished Robert Whittaker and Israel Adesanya. That's not accidental. You may not understand how it works, and I get that because I don't fully understand how his game works, and I really should do a serious look at his game. But he's incredibly successful. It's not by accident. And again, he's tied with Rich Franklin in title defenses. He's actually not that... He'll tie Weidman if he gets one more, because Weidman only had the 3, right? He had the Silva rematch, the Machida win, and then the Vitor Belfort win. And then he lost it to Luke Rockhold. He's about to tie Chris Weidman. You could make the argument that Dricus du Plessis is the 3rd best middleweight champion right now that the UFC's had. I know that would be leapfrogging him over Weidman at the moment, but if you look at the back end of Weidman's career, I don't even mean like when he was clearly washed. I mean, just look at post-title loss. That loss to Luke Rockhold did some damage to him. So, again, kind of forget the point at which him coming out was just kind of sad. I mean, okay, he lost the belt to Luke Rockhold in a pretty darn good fight. based on one bad decision he made. Well, then he fights Yoel Romero, and I had that 1-1 going into the third. Other people had him up 2-0, but like, hey, he's doing good. And then bam, flying knee. Okay, Yoel Romero's an athletic freak, especially at that point in time. Like, we're not counting the guy out yet, but still, like, just if you look at DDP's run right now, it's really good. I'm not sure I'd give him the number 3 slot, but his wins over Whitaker and Adesanya are better than the vast majority of Chris Weidman's wins. I think I'd only put the first Anderson Silva win over it. Yeah, he was winning that second fight even before the leg break. I don't have revisionist history about that. I remember the first round of that fight, 'cause that leg break happened in the second. I remember that first round. That was a all Chris Weidman round. But after that, you have to go to like he had because that fight with Lyoto Machida he had was actually really good too. But like Vitor Belfort at that point was like post TRT and just kind of sad. He's absolutely a better champion, middleweight champion than either Bisping or GSP. I mean that's not even close. He's got a better run in the UFC than Luke Rockhold. Like we got to start taking this guy seriously at some point. Just because you don't get it, it's not accidental. This is not a he can't keep getting away with it thing. For a while, some people had that thought. If that's your impression of Duplessis, you are mistaken. If it was as easy as you think it is, you think other people wouldn't have done it by now? There's stuff there that needs to be taken seriously. And if you're not willing to do so, you're just going to keep being frustrated and ignorant. So after the fight, there's a couple of things available for Duplessis here. I don't want to take forever on this fight. He kind of made some noise at Alex Pereira, who was in Sean Strickland's corner. Pereira seems interested in that. I don't know. That fight, I'm not saying I'd hate it, but I don't think Pereira can make 185 at this point again. I don't know that I want to see Duplessis jump up to 205 because we do have contenders, but that some version of that is kind of in play here, pursuant to other things falling in line. I mean, Pereira's got to deal with Magomed Ankalaev, so we still got stuff there. You got Khamzat Chimaev, who is pretty clearly the next in line. Duplessis even agreed with that. And he also did a little bit of matchmaking and said he'd like to see Nasruddin Imavov and Caio Borralho. Because the winner of that would pretty clearly be get the shot at the winner of Duplessis and Chimaev. Refreshing. Refreshing to see a champion not play games. Given how many fighters at this point, if they're in kind of DDP's position, a couple of title defenses, including big win over an all-timer like Izzy, would kind of play some games here. He's just like, nah, I know who the next guy in line is. The Pereira fight is I think he's putting that out there as a feeler. I think he'd be interested. I think it would represent that's probably a more financially lucrative fight for him than Chimaev, but not necessarily by a whole lot. And frankly, Chimaev and Duplessis, yes, please. That will be wild. I don't know how I lean in that fight. There's actually there's not a lot of tape on Chimaev. He slows down if the fight goes long, but trying to survive the hurricane that he brings in the first round. And stopping his back take. I don't even mean the full-on hooks or anything. If he just gets to a ride, you're just not getting away from that guy. So he'd have to do that. But once again, Duplessis is stubborn, strong, a pretty good grappler in his own right, good power, and we know he can fight hard for 5 rounds. We don't know that about Chimaev. So, a lot of unknowns there, but not in a bad way. I don't know what's next for Sean Strickland. He's still got some goodwill with the fans because of how he talks, and they don't just mean like being an edgelord. I mean, yes, he does that, but he also does the, I'm a man of the people. I come in there, I go, and yeah, not all of most of his fights are not great. But people buy into the rhetoric. So he does still have some fan goodwill in that respect. But he really needs a little bit of a paradigm shift. He needs some second order weaponry. Um, Something to help bring his game to life. Because what he does, it works. Like, dude became a champion legitimately. He beat Israel Adesanya. And that wasn't in dispute. He won that fight fair and square. But if he's just going to keep doing what he's doing, I don't think he gets back to the title level. He'll win fights. I mean, the style he has, it beats a lot of that division. But it a lot of people seem to be losing their patience with the Sean Strickland show, for want of a better expression. Okay, co-main event for the strawweight title. Zhang Weili defeats Tatiana Suarez via unanimous decision. 249-46 and a 49-45. Where to start with this? This was a lot of people. Tatiana Suarez closes the favorite here, which I can understand. Last week, before I'd seen the two next to each other and really kind of thought about it harder, I leaned her just a little bit. But I don't have to carry having to pay out on Zhang Weili winning a fight as an underdog. A lot of those, any of those places did, and that, oh boy. So I mentioned I changed my mind because Suarez doesn't do well against people who can match her physicality. She's a better wrestler than most of the division. In fact, in just amateur wrestling credentials by a large margin. And there was a time that, people thought of her as the female Khabib, which if you look at this performance is comical, but I was there with her first couple of fights, She ran people over. Here's the problem, though. She just messed her neck up in 2019. Then she had knee issues. So you got to understand this. You may not know this, but her UFC debut was in 2016. And she's had, so we count that fight, so 2016. That's her UFC debut. Her total number of UFC fights are what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fights in almost 9 years. That's just, I don't know what to say. I know this isn't her fault. Like, this wasn't her playing with the UFC. This wasn't her sitting out for more money. This was, boy, my neck got messed up. Boy, illness, and boy, knee injury. Like, none of that was her fault. But, yeah, she looked like a buzzsaw in 2018. She ran through Alexa Grasso. I mean, ran through her. She battered the crap out of Carla Esparza. Like, that version of Suarez, it still had problems. I mean, even at that point, but if you look at that point in their relative careers, like, Khabib wasn't even quite Khabib at that point in his UFC run. A handful of, 4 fights in, right? He was still figuring some stuff out. then, yeah, she just gets her neck messed up and never really recovers. She had 2 fights fall through. Like, her last win was 2023 when she choked out Jessica Andrade and had some struggles there on occasion. She had fights fall out with Amanda Lemos and Virna Jandiroba since then. She really needed at least one of those to go through to prove where she is right now. And she didn't get it. Didn't do her any favors. She's also 34, and Zhang's 35. But, yeah, Suarez she got a takedown in the first, but all she had was control. No ground and pound. Dude, she didn't land a single significant strike in the first or second, and then I think in the fourth she only landed one. If you're in a UFC title fight and across a 3-round period you land one significant strike, I don't know what to tell you about that. Anemic barely begins to describe it. She got blown out of the water here. She got tired fairly quickly, not like doubled over, gasping for air tired, but visibly like slowed and fatigued. Zhang looked sharp, physically strong, countered most of her wrestling down the stretch, did a lot of ground and pound, landed some really good strikes on the feet. Zhang Weili is still very, very good and made the odds makers look very, very foolish with this one. Suarez, if her wrestling doesn't work, she does not have a second order of offense. Well, her wrestling is good. Some of her entries struggle, and she has nothing on the feet to set it up. You need some weapons on the feet to bring your wrestling to life. Like, Khabib's striking was never as technically proficient as even other guys from his camp. Like, Islam Makhachev is technically a much better striker than Khabib. But Khabib developed a handful of weapons that you had to pay attention to, and it opened up his wrestling, which is what he really wanted. If all you had to do was worry about his wrestling, still a problem, but an easier problem to mitigate than also having to worry about an overhand right and a decent jab on occasion. That stuff opened up his game. He wasn't trying to be the best boxer in the UFC. He was trying to have relevant hand weapons that you had to pay attention to so that he could close distance rapidly. Suarez doesn't have any of that. Just pretty much none of it. Really, really, I'm not trying to be mean when I say the following, but that was an incredibly poor, by every metric, attempt to claim a UFC title. In a lot of ways, that was more anemic and less competitive than Strickland and Duplessis. In a lot of ways. After this fight, I don't know who else is left for Zhang. They might just try to hotshot Mackenzie Dern up there. Or if Dern wants one more fight, Zhang could try her hand at 125 and fight Valentina. That's kind of been circling the MMA, collective consciousness for a little bit. And at this point, kind of why not, The rest of this card, this will be quick. So, Taliesin Teixeira defeats Justin Tafa via TKO. Landed a pretty good early strike, got into a clinch, landed a knee to the body, landed a cracking right elbow, busted Tafa's nose, dropped him, got the finish. Tafa wasn't happy with the stoppage. The stoppage was fine. And then Tafa got cut. Teixeira's a big dude. He's like 6'7". We'll just have to see how he develops, but, heavyweight needs help, so we'll see if he can provide some. Jimmy Crute and Rodolfo Bellato fought to a majority draw. No issues with Crute getting a 10-8 in the first. I gave him one. And then Bellato, to his credit, fought his way back into the fight in rounds 2 and 3, but you drop a round that badly, that's just not really going to go well for you. Not a very good fight. Jake Matthews defeated Francisco Prado via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Prado, this was his first trip up to welterweight in the UFC. I'd have to double check if ever. Matthews is not the biggest welterweight in the world, but he's a bigger welterweight, and the size difference here was pretty apparent. I don't know that welterweight will bear out well for Prado if he keeps going here. Jake Matthews, I kind of hate to say it, but, he's been in the UFC for a long time. I mean, he's over the 10-year mark at this point. His UFC debut, he's almost at the 10-year. No, he's almost at the 11-year mark. Excuse me. It was June of 14. And he's had a very respectable UFC run, but I feel like we've seen his ceiling at this point. On the prelims, Gabriel Santos, really good fight from him. He got hit with a really nasty head kick in the first. Fought his way back into things. Got Jack Jenkins down. Better grappler. Got a rear naked choke in the third. I mentioned, man, Gabriel Santos' record is deceptive because he fights very well. Tom Nolan defeated Vyacheslav Barshov via unanimous decision, 229-28 and a 30-27. I can see Barshov taking the third. Nolan just did some really nice kicking, better striking, grappling when he needed to. Just, got the win. Wang Tong defeated Bruno Brazil via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Not quite the dynamic version of Wang that you might have expected, but very composed, very measured, and I don't mean that as a negative. Like, she got way out over her skis in her last fight and paid for it. She didn't want to do that. I think there's still some fine-tuning of her aggression that needs to be dialed in, but seeing her dial it back after the last fight was not a bad thing. She'll probably dial it up a little bit for her next one and just try to find that sweet spot. Alexander Topuria defeated Colby Thickness via unanimous decision, 30-27 across the boards. Thickness stepped in on fairly short notice. This was supposed to be Cody Haddon. Thickness did not fight badly here, despite losing pretty clearly. Alexander Topuria looked a little rusty. He's been out of action for a while. He devoted a lot of his time to getting Ilya, his brother, into the UFC and then to the title level. So, got some similar boxing habits, good right hand, some pretty decent footwork, very measured. Hit a really nice German suplex, actually, at the end of the first round. Really nice. Haven't seen one that nice since probably Michael Chandler and Benson Henderson. Still, again, needs some of the rust to get knocked off. Thickness, as I mentioned, did not fight badly. Just struggled to really get a lot of his offense working. Threw a lot of it out there and made some decent reads, so actually moderately optimistic for both guys. Let's see. Rong Zhu defeated Cody Steele via unanimous decision. This was your fight of the night. Zero problems with that from me. Cody Steele had some hype coming into this, given his grappling pedigree. Fell in love a little bit too much with his hands, and Rong Zhu just stopped pretty much all of his takedowns, his leg entanglements, and just the better striker, better footwork. Rong Zhu's a guy who's had he's in his second UFC stint. Had some rough fights, but he's with City Kickboxing at least part-time now. They seem to have done him a world of good. So really good win for him. Jonathan Mikalev defeated Kevin Jusay via unanimous decision, 29-28 across the boards. These two tore each other up with body kicks and head kicks. They were standing opposite stances, and that's kind of what both men just threw a lot of. And I was just begging one of them to start throwing side kicks to the lead leg. Especially if you're open stance, and you're dealing with somebody who's throwing a lot of those, if you get a read on when they're going to throw them, get your guard proper, but lead leg, side kick, or stomp to their lead leg, to the knee. That will change the tenor of the fight fairly quickly and probably get them to stop throwing as many of those, because getting kicked in the knee while you're on one leg throwing a kick is terrible. Neither of them really did it, but and don't do that in the gym very often, by the way, but there's my minor technical thought for you there. Yeah, kind of a brutal fight. Again, they tore each other apart. There was some gnarly welts and bruising on Jusei's body. And kicking everything off, Quillen Salklid defeated Anshul Jubli via TKO. Nice right hand, 19 seconds into the first round. Jubli wasn't happy about the stoppage, but the way he dropped, I could see it. And yeah, that was the card. Not a bad... There's some gems here. What would I recommend? Okay, Rongju and Cody Steele, easy recommend. Santos and Jenkins is not bad. At least Teixeira and Tafa was short, as was Salkeld and Jubli. Didn't hate Mikolev and Jusei, but for an $80 card, especially the main card, like, no, did not deliver. Two very forgettable pay-per-view events have been headlined by Duplessis and Strickland with a women's title fight in the co-main event. Let's not do that again, please. Your other performance bonuses went to Talish and Teixeira and Quillen Salklid. Salkeld. It's the question of whether or not you'd take one of those two out and give the other one to Santos, given, there were 3 finishes all night. And frankly, I understand giving it to those two, and Santos kind of being the odd man out. Does feel like an occasion where they could have thrown a third one his way and just been like, everybody who got a finish because they were at such a premium gets a bonus, but... Minor note, they did announce for the upcoming Hall of Fame class of 2025 our fight going into the Hall of Fame from UFC 236, Israel Adesanya and Kelvin Gastelum, which is a great fight. Co-main event to Dustin Poirier and Max Holloway, which was also a great fight. That's one of the best co-main events you'll ever find. I can't quite say it's the best because technically Fedor and Krokop was a co-main event, which was bonkers to do that, by the way, but pride. So, anyway, great fight. No problem with that getting into the Hall of Fame. Yeah, that's all fine and dandy. So, full report in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com. Y'all know that, so go give it a read if you're so inclined. I always appreciate it. All right, let's move on. I'm pretty sure that's all. UFC and ESPN plus 109. Because I don't think it's on ESPN proper. Let me check real fast. If that is already listed a week out or not. Where are you? There you are, MMA. Yeah, it looks like the whole thing. So that'll be UFC on ESPN plus 109. Sorry, that was a long wait for essentially a bookkeeping bit of information, but there we are. So, clear out this. Okay, using ESPN plus 109, not 8, geez. I knew I was wrong about that. Okay, 109. There we go. So, your main event, I mentioned already, I actually don't have a problem with the main event. At middleweight, Jared Cannonier and RoboCop Gregory Rodriguez. RoboCop meets the Killer Gorilla. I feel like that's a direct-to-DVD movie somewhere. So Cannonier, riding a two-fight losing streak. I know he wasn't thrilled with the stoppage in the Imavov fight, but why is that listed improperly? I don't know. Okay, that's not my issue. Sorry. But Kyle Bahalio beat him pretty fair and square in that 5-round fight. That was a good fight, though. So he had a really, 0-2 in 2024. Won his last two before that. The Strickland win, again, a little disputed. But he beat Marvin Vettori clean. Clean decision. So he's kind of looking to right the ship, whereas Rodriguez, only 32, but looks older. His only losses in the UFC, a split decision to Armin Petrosian that I thought he won. And then got a little too aggressive against Bruno Ferreira. He's won his last three, two of them stoppages. This is a decent step up for him, though. Cannonier fought for the belt, is highly ranked. I mean, the next closest analog for him would be, Brad Tavares? Yeah. So big step up for RoboCop here. If this were 3 rounds, I actually might be more inclined to favor Rodriguez. Because Cannonier actually, I think, some of his style is better over 5 rounds because he's patient, but he's devastating when he goes. I don't really expect this fight to go the distance. Both men are just quite willing to engage, and they both have good power and good finishing instincts. So I'm not telling you to take the under on this one. That might be a problem, but I would be a little surprised if this went the distance, if we're being honest. Here's the other thing. Gregory Rodriguez, I mentioned, only 32, whereas Cannonier is 40 and he's coming up on 41 in about a month. A little over a month as I record this. So that's kind of a big deal. An 8-year age gap is nothing to sneeze at. Now, if Rodriguez hasn't fixed some of his defensive habits, Cannonier can absolutely flatline him. That's very, very possible. But I've kind of been on the RoboCop bandwagon for a little bit. I'm actually going to go with him. Not by a lot. The odds are slightly in his favor, and I kind of think they're about where they should be. So it's a good fight, though. The odds on your co-main I find strange. It's Calvin Kattar and Yusuf Zalal, which is not a bad fight. But most places have Zalal like minus 400. That's a little bit wild to me. See, I know Calvin Kattar is 36. He's on a 3-fight losing streak. One of those, I thought he beat Josh Emmett. Frankly, I scored that for him. He had the weird knee injury against Arnold Allen, and then Sterling beat him pretty fairly. That loss to Max Holloway, and then the war with Josh Emmett, they just kind of did a number on him. A lot of people are leaning into that, and they're looking at Yusuf Zalal, who since returning, he's only 28, and he returned to the UFC in 2024, 3 fights, 3 finishes, 3 wins, 2 performance bonuses for whatever that's worth, and as far as analysis goes. It's easy to see one guy seems to be going up, the other guy seems to be going down. However, let's take just a second here. I don't think Yusuf Zalal has fought anyone close to as good as Calvin Kattar. Okay, minor exception. His second UFC fight? Third. Fourth, really. Okay, so his first UFC stint, he goes 3-0 to start and then runs into Ilia Topuria. Okay, so Topuria, the best guy he's fought, and that's not terribly close. But that was in 2020, and actually that was one of the fights where afterwards Topuria started leaning more into his boxing because did a lot of grappling in that fight and got a little bit tired. So learning experience for Topuria. Um, but so since then, this is the best guy he's fought. Um, a lot of people are also going to be looking at how Aljamain Sterling was able to beat Kattar and what Yusuf Zalal has done lately with his grappling attack, and might think that that's replicable. And I don't know that it is for Zalal because I don't know that he has Aljamain Sterling's wrestling in general, but back exposure exploitation in particular. Mostly because Sterling is like one of the best in the sport at that. Do I really think Calvin Kattar is that shot? He did not look good against Sterling, and I don't just mean like the times he was fighting off with Sterling on his back. I mean, his offensive output was not great in that fight. I can see why people are thinking he might be a little bit too shot. I would not be comfortable with those odds, personally. I do think I'm going to asterisk this one because I want to watch their last couple of fights before I need to rewatch Kattar and Sterling in particular. Um, but at the moment, I'm going to lean towards Zalal just a little bit, but dude, plus 380, 380. Like plus 300 on Kattar in this, you are asking for trouble, man. Just asking for it. Middleweight next, Edmund Shabazian, still around. So Shabazian he did the thing. Look, he's left, I think he's left Glendale Fight Club, which, overdue. But he's still, like, some of this has been matchmaking that's been rough for him. Like, Derek Brunson beat him up and showed how to do it. Then Jack Hermanson did it. Then Nasruddin Imavov did it. Then he got kind of a gimme against Dalcha Lungiambula. Then he had to fight Anthony Hernandez, and Fluffy Hernandez is that dude is a problem. Then he got kind of a gimme against AJ Dobson, and then Gerald Mershart sucked it up through a bad first round, got him down in the second, and got him with an arm triangle. Like, Shabazian had a lot of hype early on, and then, like most guys who came out of Edmund Tarverdian's camp, had some natural ability. Then once someone figured out, okay, here's how you beat him, no, Edmund had no ability to actually coach. Couldn't help strategize. Couldn't figure out how to change his fighter up to make them more dangerous. And once the book's written on his fighters, it's kind of written in stone. So the question is whether or not Shabazian can beat Dylan Budka. Now, Budka, 7-4. He's what? 0-2? Yeah, he's 0-2 in the good grief. They're giving him another gimme. So, Budka has lost to Cesar Almeida and Andre Petrosky. You must wait for the Petrosky fight, too. This is the kind of fight Shabazian probably wins. I'll say that if Shabazian loses this one, he is definitely gone. There is just no... If he's losing to this guy, sell all the stock you have in that man. Because it will be worthless. But I will go with Shabazian here. Feels like a gimme. And he tends to win the gimmies, so there's that. Lightweights, Ismail Bonfim and Nazim Sadikov. You know, this is not a bad fight. It's really not. So Bonfim, 20-4. 2-1 in the UFC. Yeah, he knocked out Terrence McKinney, then couldn't do much against Benoit Saint-Denis. Then he rebounded okay, beating Vince Pichel. I mean, I'm not going to hold the Saint-Denis loss against him too much, given what Benoit Saint-Denis has gone on to do. Sadikov 9-1-1. He is Azerbaijani. Yes, that's the flag. 2-0-1 in the UFC. Um, yeah, the draw with Barchot, that was actually a fun little fight. But that was in 2023. He missed all of 24. Sheesh. Um, okay, you'd be foolish to discount Sadikov here. Just gonna throw that out there. Very foolish. The odds are with Bonfim, and I think that's fair. I think the odds here are actually about right. It's about minus 150, 160 for Bonfim, which I think is. I'm gonna go that route, but the Bonfim brothers were one of those groups that those duos that were like, yeah, they're gonna really take the place by storm, and well, turns out not so much. They're very adept at beating guys who are just not very good or very, very flawed. And that does kind of fit Sadikov, but I want to think about that one a little bit too. There's a few things I do want to see about them. Actually, take a quick look here. Sadikov, 35-10. 69-inch reach. Bonfim, 29, 5'8". He's 2 inches shorter. He's a little shorter, but he actually has a longer reach. Huh. I still kind of want to see them next to each other, but I'm gonna be okay leaning at the moment for Bonfim. All right, middleweight next, Adolfo Vieira and Andre Petroski. My stance on Andre Petroski is pretty well set at this point. Um, Not terribly impressed. I mean, there's impressive stuff about about some of his skills, but he's slightly been propped up. Not hugely, slightly. Um, and I don't know that he's going to have I mean, dealing with Adolfo Vieira is very, very difficult. That guy is one of the best black belts of his generation. And he's looked pretty solid his last couple of fights against Brundage and Petrosian. So I'll go with Vieira. I think there's reason to be somewhat optimistic about Petroski's chances here, but I'm not going to pull the trigger on that one. And kicking off the main card, we have Connor Matthews and Jose Delgado. So Matthews, 7-2. He's been out for a minute or two, hasn't he? 0-1 in the UFC. Lost his UFC debut to Dennis Bazookia. Yeah, been a minute, about a year. Because he had a little bit of hype coming off of his Contender Series win going into that one. And Bazookia shut him down and then finished him. Delgado, 8-1. 5-fight winning streak. Well, this is UFC debut, yes? Yes, it is. I might just go with the odds on this one. Let's see what we got here. Odds are with Delgado. Yeah, I'll respect it. Don't know how much I love that one. The odds on some of these kinds of fights have been way off somewhat recently. All right, on the prelims, let's see. We have Angela Hill and Ketlin Souza. Feels like Souza. She lost to Karine Silva, then won her last two fights over Marna Mann and Yasmin Hauregui. Actually, hmm. I need to see. Where are you on this card? There you are. Oh, that's Ketlin Souza. Okay. It might have been. I might be walking that back. Um, like I'm far from like the biggest Angela Hill booster that you'll ever find, but um, I still think Hill still might still have a little bit of gas left in the tank. I mean, I know she's 40, recently 40. Yeah, let me lean towards Hill. I don't know how I feel about that one. It's another one I'm gonna kind of reserve the right to rethink in a minute or two. All right, lightweights, Jared Gordon and Kauê Fernandez. So Gordon, I got a bit of a soft spot for the guy. Been out of action since June of last year when he lost a split decision to Nasrat Haqparast. Beat Mark Madsen before that. He should have beat Paddy Pimblett. I still don't get the scoring on that one at all. Fernandez. Where are you? Oh, this fight seems to be off. Huh. Well, that's unfortunate. Um, okay, if the fight, yeah, is rarely ever wrong about this stuff. Yeah, let me not pick that right now, and we'll see if they get together a replacement fight for Jared Gordon, because it looks like Fernandez is the one who pulled out. Okay, flyweight next. Rafael Estevam and Jesus Santos Aguilar. Let's have a quick look here. Yeah, there's the odds like Estevam. Let me double check see if I agree with that. Where are you? That one doesn't look like it's fallen out. There you are. Okay. Estevam 12-0. Ooh, I do kind of remember this guy. Had he missed weight, but beating Charles Johnson in UFC debut is nothing to sneeze at. Was a while ago though. That was 2023. Hmm. Aguilar is 11-2, 3-1 in the UFC. Wins over Shannon Ross, Mateusz Mendonça, and then Stuart Nickel. He missed weight for the Nickel fight. Yeah, I will agree with the odds here and go with Estevam. That layoff, though, is, again, it's not huge. It's a little over a year, but still not exactly the most confidence-inspiring thing in the world. Gabriel Bonfim and Chaos Williams. So Williams has won his last two. It was a decent knockout over Carlston Harris he got. Um, Gabriel Bonfim. I think Gabriel's the one who's a little bit better of the two. 16-1. I might have that backwards. 3-1 in the UFC. No, I do. Well, he also competes in welterweight. His only welterweight losses to his only UFC losses to Nicholas Dalby. He just gassed out after throwing everything with the kitchen sink at Dalby. He rebounded by beating Angelosa. Okay. Um, I actually think I'm going to lean towards Bonfim here. Yeah. All right, so I picked both Bonfim brothers. That might be a dubious proposition. Bantamweight's next, Vince Morales and Elijah Smith. This is Vince Vendetta Morales. Had a rough UFC go his first time. Really did. Beat Amin Zahabi. He lost to Song Yudong. Beat Amin Zahabi. Lost to Benito Lopez. Lost to Chris Gutierrez. Beat Draco Rodriguez. Beat Louis Smolka. Lost to Jonathan Martinez. No shame there. Lost to Miles Johnson. Got cut. Went on a big winning streak. Then on short notice, returned and lost to Taylor Lapilus in a decent fight. Not great, but decent. So he's trying to get his first UFC win since he beat Smolka in 2021. That is a time to go without a UFC win. He took that fight on short notice, though, against Lapilus, because he, Peruvian necktied Hunter Azure not too long before that. Anyway, Elijah Smith, by contrast, 7-1. I think this is his UFC debut. Yes, it is. 5-fight winning streak. Well, that's certainly nothing to sneeze at. Am I going to pick the more veteran fighter here, just kind of on principle? Odds are with Smith. All right, I'm going to pick Morales. I don't want to... I think I've only picked favorites thus far. I don't feel good about that. I don't like when I do that. It feels like cheating. I mean... I shouldn't say it feels like cheating. If I come to the same conclusion, I don't like it. It makes me feel weird. Heavyweights, Walter Walker and Dontel Mays. Heaven help us. Dontel Mays coming off a loss to Shamil Gaziev. Beat Kyle Machado before that. Lost to Rodrigo Nascimento before that. And Walker... He's what? 2-1 in the UFC? 1-1? 12-1 overall. 1-1 in the UFC. Lost to Lukasz Dreszki, and then Junior Taffa got pissy about screaming in pain to a heel hook, and then, no, I didn't tap out. Buddy, verbal screams of pain constitute, a yell of pain constitutes a verbal submission. It's in the rules. Deal with it. Verbal submissions are not just saying tap. All right, people? Again, expressly written in the rules. I do not know about this one. They both kind of suck. Maybe Walker? Mays gasses and Mays struggles with some of the heavy wrestling. All right, I'm going to go Walker. I just don't pick Dontel Mays kind of as at this point. And kicking everything off, Julia Avila versus Jacqueline Cavalcante. Avila been out of action since December of 23 when she lost to Miesha Tate. Cavalcante has actually looked pretty good. Only 27. 2 split decisions her last couple of times. But in general, she's looked better, and that layoff for Avila is not exactly confidence building. No problems going with Cavalcante here. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the card as it currently stands. So, MMAZone411mania.com on Saturday. I will have you covered, and we'll just hope for good action. So stop by, say hello. I always appreciate it. All right, let's try to get through some of these news sections relatively quickly here, but there is stuff to talk about. So, first up, Dominick Cruz. announced his retirement from the sport of mixed martial arts. So he was supposed to fight Rob Font at the upcoming Seattle card. Font pulled out. They were looking for a replacement, I think, and Cruz says he suffered a second shoulder dislocation or separation in the past, like, was it 8 weeks, give or take? The last few months. You know, 2 to 3 months. And says, you know what? That's it. The body's falling apart, and I got to call it. You know what? That's a wise decision. Um, you don't want to wind up with a shoulder like TJ Dillashaw's. You just don't. Dominick Cruz, one of my favorite fighters. I remember vividly when I was doing a bit of a, it might have been on him actually. So during the pandemic, to keep myself occupied in the MMA space, I did a series of like career studies for some different fighters. One of them was Cruz, and I realized some of the timing on some of what he was doing in the WEC when he was like moving like nobody else. Mind blowing to those people who saw it. At like the same time, Frankie Edgar with the basics of footwork made half the lightweight division look like they were standing in mud. With very, when I say basic, I'm not trying to be insulting, but not terribly sophisticated, just effective, and people who like fighting like they're in mud. Then there's Dominick Cruz, who is movement and combinations and just Willie Pep inspired all over the place, and just took the boxing part of being a wrestle boxer seriously instead of being a wrestle puncher. One of the more transformative fighters you'll find. People are still kind of just catching up to some of the stuff he was doing and innovating. His return to reclaim the belt from TJ Dillashaw is still one of my favorite moments. That is a glorious fight. I wish him nothing but the best in retirement. Crazy to think that despite all the setbacks and the layoffs and the injuries, still one of the best. Weird to think what his legacy might have been if he could stay healthy. Might have taken a few other losses at different points, but just a really remarkable fighter in a lot of ways. And my hat's off to him. I will miss watching his. I will miss his future. I will miss the fights that won't happen. He was great, genuinely great. So, thank you, Mr. Cruz, for the memories. Thank you for the lot of tape study I've done on you, for the technical stuff you innovated, that you brought to MMA, that you opened my eyes to, and for kind of forcing the sport to level up to meet your game. So, thank you very much, and the best for everything going forward. All right, shorter bit of news here, but Ari Emanuel, one of the owners of TKO Group, which owns UFC and WWE, he indicated something a little bit troubling, that he kind of wants to try and get the Ollie Act banned, or repealed, so that the UFC can get into boxing. Oh, what a terrible idea that is. Okay, here's the thing. You have to understand this. People do the boxing is broken argument because there's a million sanctioning bodies. There's only a handful that actually matter, but there's a lot of sanctioning bodies. And you can't have a promoter and a manager be kind of the same thing. And fighters are free to lobby different promoters or different networks. And this is why boxing can make so much money, and why fighters in boxing make so much more money than MMA fighters. But the flip side of that is you don't always get the best fighting the best. You occasionally will get times where guys just, for whatever reason don't want to fight each other, or just one person doesn't want to fight the other, and then the fight won't happen because there's no, apart from just money, There's no mechanism to force it necessarily, assuming you're willing to give up titles potentially because you won't fight a mandatory. Unless, of course, you're, a big enough star or in good with one of the sanctioning bodies looking squarely at you, Canelo. And people get frustrated by this on occasion, and I understand, but you have to understand the following. You can have a sport that's broken like MMA, or you can have a sport that's broken like boxing. You can't have a there's no such thing as a non-broken combat sport. Do you want your combat sport broken slightly in favor of the fighters, or do you want it broken catastrophically in favor of the promoter? That's the only question here. The reason Zuffa, the UFC, or Dana White never got into boxing was because they can't bully everyone around and use unfair business practices. They don't want to go into boxing because the margins are not 80-20 in our favor. The fundamental argument for let's repeal the Ali Act is let's make the fighters more exploited by the managers and promoters. That's it. That's the argument. That's all it does. And I understand the consequences of that for boxing in terms of how it is right now. I've been frustrated with it. We've all been frustrated with it on occasion. I'm going to be honest. I find the boxing business model more ethical than the UFC model. That's just how it is. But we're going to keep an eye on that one. I don't find anything approximating like logic in repealing the Ali Act personally, but I'm just me. And I'm not kind of buddy-buddy with the president, so who knows? But if that gets repealed, it's gonna be a bad day for boxers. Real bad day. Okay, moving on, because there's not enough other than like a soundbite about that being sort of a goal. I don't know. In more concrete news, the judge in the UFC fighter lawsuit, this is specifically the Kung Lee version, the Cage and Johnson one is still going forward, approved the $375 million settlement and the method of distribution and the timing of payouts and whatnot. So any fighters who are part of that class, don't fall for BS about somebody getting a cut of your money. It is yours, not your managers, not your coaches, not even necessarily your lawyers. The lawyer fees are all taken care of. This is just your money. Fill out the proper paperwork. Go claim it. Anyone worried about recriminations from the UFC? They're publicly saying they want fighters to claim it. Now, behind closed doors, they might be saying something very different, but that's speculation on my part. I'm just acknowledging that possibility. Claim your money. Please do so, and we'll see what goes on with. I mean, that took a long time. I'm glad for the fighters, and we'll see what happens with the Johnson case going forward. But that is rearview mirror now, and if there's anything else that's going to happen, it is going to be from the next case. Again, the one Cage and Johnson brought. The other one is now settled. Judge approved it. Enough money's handing out, and the judge had some issues with the two lawsuits being settled together. There might have been something about that's going to be for the ongoing one if he wants to take a look at, again, contracts or injunctive relief. So, but the current one is settled. Not for enough in my opinion, but fighters have been underpaid forever, so not going to bang that drum too much. I know some of you are tired of me doing so. All right, we had a couple of fights shift around. Brandon Royval fell out of his fight with Manel Kopp. That will be on the March 1st card. He's being replaced by Asu Almabayev. I like Almabayev. This seems like a big jump up in competition for him. Um, and we know the headliner for the March 29th card. They will be in Mexico City for that. It will be Brandon Moreno and Steve Erceg. Steve Erceg getting no breaks. No breaks for Steve Erceg. So nothing major there, but figured I'd mention those. And okay, that's all I have listed. So let me check the old social medias, and if nothing new is broken in the MMA space, we will do plugs and get out of here. Nope, nothing new there. So plugs. Monday on Damn You Hollywood, myself, Mark Radulich, and anybody else on that one? Nope, just me and Mark. We will be reviewing Love Hurts, so that should be a decent time. That is not me. Okay, so that's my only other podcast. See the usual coverage: WWE SmackDown on Friday, UFC on Saturday. Last week I reviewed Companion with Mark and Alexis on Damn You Hollywood. That was fine. I also stopped by on Tuesday for a special Damn You Hollywood where Alexis, Zach Strobel, David Wright, and myself reviewed Wallace and Gromit: Vengeance Most Foul, and what a delightful little film that is. So if you're interested in my yammerings about movies, go give those a listen over on the W2M network. Always appreciated. We'll be back here next week to review UFC on ESPN Plus 109, and we will preview UFC Fight Night 252. They're in Washington. We don't know if this will be on ESPN or ESPN Plus. Okay, that's what we're waiting on. We'll preview the upcoming card. They're in Seattle. It's headlined by Henry Cejudo and Song Yadong. What else is on this card? I like Brendan Allen and Anthony Hernandez. That's a rematch from their pre-UFC days, if memory serves. Jean Silva and Melsik Bagdasaryan. Bagdasaryan kind of annoys me. Another one of those Edmund Tarverdian guys who got a couple of easy fights, then a real fight, lost, and then got a gimme as a, yeah. Silva probably crushes him. Jean Silva's good. So, Curtis Blades, don't care that much. Edson Barboza, Steve Garcia, don't really care. Give me something else to care about here, come on. Oh, wait. Font didn't pull out of that? I could have sworn I heard that Font pulled out of that fight with Cruz first, but okay. So, apparently not. Apparently they're looking for a replacement for Rob Font, so... See, Michael Chiesa really wants to be on that card, but does not have an opponent yet. And Andre Fili and Melquiel Acosta. That's a lot of ink. It's a lot of ink in one place between those two. Okay, it's not great. It's not great. But there's, those top three fights actually, as it currently stands, Cejudo and Song, I don't actually care about that all that much. Allen and Hernandez is a good fight, and Silva and Bagdasaryan is not a bad fight. So, full preview next week, so come on back for that. Alright, I will see you all then. Thank you very, very much for listening. I appreciate the heck out of you guys. Stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.